Archer Monologues, D. McClung. Today's show is a bit of odds and ends, bits and pieces. We could call it, what could we call it? Aside from that, we could call it Dumb and Dumber. Some interesting tidbits from the news, from the headlines. I must admit, sometimes I listen to the weather and I just get a little, well, I have emotions too, and sometimes when I'm reading the headlines or watching the news on online, don't watch television, don't have cable, don't have satellite, don't have TV. I'm talking about network TV. Now, online, you can watch, say, TV shows on, say, Netflix, and there's other websites that offer that. And I kind of like the British shows. There's British detective shows, police shows, or whatever. And so I'm watching, let's say, I'm watching Barnaby on Midsummer Murders. It's a show that's been on for 18, 20 years. Pretty good show. And, it's about cops solving murders. That is to say, finding the bad guys. What I find interesting about British shows is that apparently police detectives, or like Barnaby and his sidekick Jones, I believe, at this point. Now I'm talking about John Barnaby as opposed to Tom Barnaby, who was really pretty cool as the lead character in that show. But my point in bringing that up is this. You have British shows, and those shows cannot help but reflect the mindset and a great deal of the propaganda that is prevalent in England, Britain, United Kingdom, if you want to call it that. This is true in probably in all societies to some degree, but I'm not interested in what China does. And if China has a police show on television in China, I don't know, fine, not my problem. If I was universally concerned about universal situations and universal bad things in universal circumstances, like bad things that happen in China, and bad things that happen in Germany, and bad things that happen in Russia, and bad things that happen in New Zealand, then I would certainly talk about that. So, but I'm not saying that I don't have an interest in that sort of thing, but it's a foreign country, it's another place, and it's their business, they got to deal with it. People like a Chinese expatriate of China, doctor, who once told me that, because I pressed him on it, I said, how can you, because he was invited back to China to do lectures on doctoring, medicine, health, and he went, and he was treated very well, given a nice hotel room and chauffeured around to the conferences that he was attending. And he spoke. He was a guest speaker in these conferences and so forth. And I would be very proud of myself if I was in that situation. I think he has every right to be proud of himself. And he went and he talked about medicine. As far as I know, he didn't talk politics. He didn't mention anything about talking about politics. But I asked him, how can you go to, well, it was his homeland. I assume that he was born in China and came to America and became a very successful doctor for many, many years, and not too long ago passed away at a goodly age. But I asked him the question, and I had the opportunity to be in his company at some point. I had a business arrangement going on. It wasn't no big deal. I won't get into the details of that, but it was just a normal situation where I just happened to be working for him. I was a general contractor, and I did general contracting work, and he hired me to do a little job. So, but I asked him, and I asked him rather point blank, how can you condone the evil government of China? How can you just go there and take advantage and let the government of China, treat you like royalty, give you the opportunity to speak and have a luxury hotel room and catering and chauffeurs and while the people of China are treated like sheep or whatever, censorship and certain brutalities and certain insane behaviors by the government against the people of China. How could you go there and participate? In other words, I'm saying, how can you collaborate with the enemy of freedom and the Chinese people? And the government of China is just as much the enemy of the people as the government of the United States. And I say government of the United States, meaning the government is called the United States, not America. The country is America, the government is called the United States. And I won't go into detail about that because that's another paragraph. But I asked him, how can you go there and just take the perks from these, Chinese communist bastards, mistreating their people and censorship and depriving them of their human rights and so on. And he said to me, and I'll paraphrase, and he spoke in, he had a little Chinese accent left, even though he lived in America for decades, perhaps most of his life. Well, actually, most of his life, as far as I know. And as far as I know, he's a good doctor. And apparently a successful one. His response was something along this line. I'm not political. I'm not, it's not my life's purpose to be a political person, to involve myself in the politics of a foreign country. That is to say, foreign country as opposed to the country he's living in. He lives in America, so at the time he was alive, he lived in America. He worked in America. His family was in America. He did everything. He was basically just an American of Chinese descent and perhaps an immigrant. Perhaps his parents came over here and brought him with them at a young age. Now, I don't know his history in detail, but his answer was, that's for them. That's for the Chinese people to deal with. And there are, a couple of billion Chinese people? And China has a long history, much longer history than America or the United States government. And been around for thousands of years. So his response was basically what I said, and he said that's something they have to deal with. It's their country, it's their freedom, it's their lives, and if they find it intolerable, then it's their obligation or their right to do something about it, like change the government or seek freedom or seek more freedom and so on. And it dawned on me when he said that. I was kind of adamant about. Well, I was kind of being a little aggressive when I asked him the question, because I said, "How could you? How could you? I mean, I dare you. I mean, the audacity to go there and take the perks and the free limousine and a free room and board and all that." And I wondered, did they offer you any prostitutes? I mean, comfort women to help you? I know that's Japanese, but trying to be polite here. And I should have asked him that. I would have asked him that if I'd had the opportunity, I think, probably. But it would have been interesting to see if they'd actually... Well, he was a married man. Well, at the time that I did the interview with him or talk with him, it was sort of an interview, I guess. But this was pre-radio, so there's no recording of it. But I asked him that, and he responded. And I learned a lesson. And I learned a lesson that Americans should learn. That the people in a society have a responsibility, a duty, shall we say, at least the obligation of dealing with their own lives in their own society. I would say country. I guess we could say country too. So the Chinese people are responsible for the Chinese government. And if they don't like it, then they should change it. Now, I won't get into whether they should change it peacefully or violently or through political means or whatever. The Dr. Wong, I believe his name was, his opinion of that, or his position on that was, he was very clear. He was very clear in pronouncing his opinion about that, or his view and his position. And I learned that something, because it just dawned on me that, wow, up until that point, maybe it hadn't dawned on me, even though I had certain very strong feelings about, well, let's say strong thoughts on on America and the government of this country and the people being subjected to all kinds of evil, criminal, treasonous, fascist, Nazi, oppressive government. So if I was to relate that, what the doctor said about his homeland or his ancestral home, but I realized when he said that, it dawned on me that, yeah, you're right, Doc, and I'm glad to hear that, actually, because I think that's right. But I don't know if I could actually condone a government that's involved in depriving people of their human rights. And the United States government is certainly depriving the people of America of their rights. And this is not even debatable. We know this for a fact. Thanks to whistleblowers like Mr. Snowden, Manning, there are several others, and I can't recall the names of some. There's a woman, a Jumping Frog song or something, website that worked for the FBI and discovered that evidence of the attack coming on 9/11. I won't get into that story, but I get around. I read different things in different areas and different situations. So the doctor kind of gave me a lesson in, say, reality, and since then I have adopted that premise myself. And before that, I admit, and I'm somewhat ashamed of the fact that I didn't think that way before he said that to me. And it's a very good point. So if the Chinese people get fed up with being deprived of their rights, then they should rebel. How they should go about that is up to them. It's their business, their country, and their problem. Now, that doesn't mean they can't have allies. I mean, if I was living in a country where I was being oppressed that where my rights were being denied to me, where I was being abused in some legal fashion or physically, say, kidnapped, abducted, put in a cage, prison, a dungeon, say extradited to a foreign country where I could be tortured. I'd be kind of upset if that happened to me. And it's possible in America today for just any citizen, including me, you, to be abducted, tortured, murdered. In fact, murdered in your street. Murdered in your bed, in your home, actually. And it happens in America daily, to some degree, every day. Americans are deprived of their rights, and their rights are violated by, and I'm talking about natural, unalienable human rights. Not talking about some fabricated right that, some idiot made up in his head and say, I've got a right to, like, I have a right, like, pre-sample, I have the right not to be offended, which is not a right at all. But at any rate, the point is, if it's the people's responsibility, just as it has been demonstrated by people actually rising up against their government and doing away with it, abolishing it. I don't want to use the word overthrow, but basically they did, in fact, overthrow the yokes of slavery, overthrow the bonds of oppression. And it comes to mind, I'm sure you could think of quite a few. I can think of at least a couple. Like, for example, America overthrew the reins of power over their lives of the British government at the time, back in 1700s, late 1700s. And they rose up and they kicked the butt of those British oppressors and abusers. Now, so England is not the boss of us, and they did what had to be done. Now, it should be noted that back in 1776 and in that era, the revolution to become independent from Britain at the time, the people generally, as is often the case, probably in every case, there's 100% of the people living in the country, and then there's say 20% of the people are actually willing to participate in the revolution to abolish a government and then hopefully reestablish a better government, as the Declaration of Independence declares, rightfully declares. And so in the case of the American Revolution, I think that, according to what I've read, the statistics might be something like 18 to 20% of Americans, that is to say the colonists or the citizens of that area known as the New World, whatever, were the ones that actively participated in, or at least were in favor of and behind the American Revolution. The military faction of that being led by George Washington, as you know. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't, because from what I've seen in recent street interviews, for example, a lot of people in this country don't know shit about their own country. Like, they don't know about who was the first president, and they're like, I don't know. They're like, that's just scary. Trust me. I mean, really, that's just fucking scary. You don't know who the first president of the United States was, and you've lived here your whole life, and you're in college? Unbelievable. Not as unbelievable as some other things that they don't know anything about and don't realize that they're being victimized by. But at any rate, in fact, as I read not too long ago, I think that George Washington's army at the end of the Revolution actually only had about 900 troops, soldiers, under his command. 900. Now, that could mean that, I don't remember if the information was given to me that how many actual soldiers he had under his command since the beginning of the revolution and during the revolution, but he ended up with 900. So that means if he had thousands, and a lot of them were killed by the British, and that's not good. But if maybe he only had 1,200 to begin with. I believe the population of the colonies back then, during the Revolutionary War, was something like about 3 million. So if you multiply that by 100 times, you get 300 million people in America today, roughly. So 20% of those would be how much? Well, I'm keeping 300 million in round figures. It might be 315, might be 312, might be 320. I don't know. I don't have the current statistics in that regard. But let's say 300, just roughly. 300 million people in America. 300 million people that have an interest in the country being free and the government being legitimate and legal and not Nazi, fascist, bastard, police state motherfuckers. So the American people, 300 million, how many would compare to, say, the military of George Washington during the Revolutionary War? If 18 to 20%, let's just say 20% of people were in favor of the revolution and actually participated in it and supported it in some way, certainly there weren't 20% of the people didn't become soldiers, apparently. That would have been 600,000, 60,000. 20% of 3 million. 60, 60, 60. 20, 20, 20 at 60. I'm doing the math in my head, sorry. I'm not up to speed yet today. 3 million. That would be 60. That would be 600,000. Am I correct? Okay. You can do the math yourself, and you can correct me if you feel like it in the comment section. You don't have to, because I got a pen, I got a calculator, I can figure this out. But I'm just saying by comparison. A lot of people today don't know American history, as I said. But what I meant to say was, how many, if we took the 20% figure today of 3 million, that's 60. With the rate zeros, you come up with 60 million? 60 million of 300 million. I don't think so. 60 million. I don't think we could get 60 million people in America to actually even focus on one problem, like the fact that the government is evil, criminal, treasonous, murderous, corrupt beyond repair, and actually take part physically, at least in some way, support a revolution in this country today to abolish or overthrow, if you want to use that word, the government and create a better one. Or none at all, actually, as Henry David Thoreau would say. And a lot of libertarians, too, as well. And anarchists, and I suppose there are actually real anarchists in the world. I'm sort of leaning toward anarchy, but not chaos and mayhem, but just pure anarchy. Which doesn't mean necessarily chaos and mayhem and everybody going around acting like crazy people. That's not what anarchy means. So anyway, if 60 million Americans, I don't think we could get 60 million Americans that were are willing to dedicate themselves to freeing us from the oppressive government of the United States government, in comparison to those 60,000. I should do the math and get this right, because it's annoying me now that I didn't do that. But I'm trying to make a point, and I think you get the point. And you can do the math yourself. I mean, it's not like you can't work a calculator or do the math on a piece of paper with a pencil or a pen or whatever. Or not on your fingers. I don't think you can really do it on... Well, you could probably... No, I don't think you can do it on your fingers. An abacus, whatever you are, if you're Chinese. The point I'm making is it would take a lot of Americans to reach that 20% mark. And I don't think we can get 60 million people in this country to agree that the government is pure, absolute evil. Criminal, treasonous, murderous, genocidal, and corrupt to the point of just stupid and insane. And I think we can get 60 million people in America today to actually say, yeah, let's have a revolution and deal with this. Because we're tired of the oppression and the murders by cops, for example, and so on. So how many Americans would it take? By another comparison, and this is, I'm not suggesting that I am in favor of Fidel Castro and his revolution, but I certainly see the point, and I certainly understand the concept of people freeing themselves from oppression, no matter who the oppressor is. And in the case of Cuba, it was pretty much the American, United States area of the continent that was ruling over and pretty much being a corrupt influence over the government of Cuba. And I got a lot of American mafia down there and gangsters and shit. Cuba, Fidel had about 600, as I recall, 600 troops, shall we call it, who actually succeeded in overthrowing the Cuban government of Batista, the American United States government puppet in that country. Successfully. Now, I'm not condoning any evil, bad, wicked, disgusting, murderous things that the soldiers of the small army of Fidel Castro committed in the course of that revolution or after. That's not the point. Certainly would consider all of that if you're trying to evaluate the plus and minuses of the Cuban Revolution of 1959. I'm not saying you shouldn't. The point is 600. And I don't know how many citizens there were in Cuba at the time. I'm guessing millions. But he overthrew that government, that corrupt, evil government, puppet of the United States government, with 600 soldiers, which is pretty amazing. Just think about it. Strategically speaking, and the concept of overthrowing anything. I think probably there have been overthrows of governments or coup d'etat of governments around the world by a lot less than 600 soldiers. Perhaps a handful of people. In the higher-ups in the office of, say, North Korea. How many would it take to overthrow the North Korean government in the old days? Or now, even, for that matter. There are some countries, and I would say probably smaller countries, you could overthrow a government. I'm thinking here, I recall there was something attempted in Venezuela against Cesar Chavez, which failed. And I'm kind of impressed by that, because the people that were trying to overthrow that government of Venezuela at the time was, America. That is to say, the government of the United States, the CIA, etc. Sticking their nose in other countries' business again, as always, and being pretty much genocidal as they always have been. So 600 in Cuba's case, Fidel Castro. 20% of the American population is 60,000. I'm going to have to do the math. Hold on. It's bugging me. All right, I had it fairly close. 600,000 people in the colonies actually was in favor of, supported, or participated in the American Revolution. And when you consider that he had 900 soldiers, George Washington had 900 soldiers at the end of that revolution, I don't think 600,000 people actually were soldiers. They played another part, apparently. Some other part, or at least were in favor in spirit. For example, modern day, if a group of Americans decided that they were going to bring on a rebellion against the United States government today, and if, let's say, 20% of the American people, that's 60 million people, that's a pretty formidable amount of people. 60 million. Getting 60 million people to agree on anything in America today is probably, like maybe, just like practically impossible. To wit, Facebook and so forth. And the election. Let's say roughly 60 million people voted for Trump and 60 million people voted for Hillary. Roughly. To make a point. So 60 million people actually did vote for one particular candidate, as opposed to a lot of candidates for president. But if you say 100 million people actually voted in the elections in America this year, that would be a third of the people in America, roughly. Let's say 30%, as opposed to 20% during the American Revolution. So, we do have a focus of large numbers of people actually did participate in an event. But there are also people that are just saying, "Yeah, I'm in favor of it. I'll just stay home and go about my business, and keep my part of society, and make my contribution towards society to keep it running and going and functioning, while the actual soldier people, and I use that loose sense, loosely, soldier in general, actually did the actual revolution and carried it off and opposed the federal government. And if that were to happen, hopefully they would succeed, and then we would have the opportunity to create and form a new government, preferably one that is not corrupt, evil, criminal, treasonous, and so forth. So that's the trouble. When you get rid of something, then you have to consider the replacement. And is the replacement better or worse than what you had in the first place? Think of it this way. You buy a toaster, and the toaster is working fine, and then it's not working fine. And you say, well, this toaster is just not doing me any good. It's just not working properly. It's actually burning my toast every time I put bread into it. To toast it, to use the toaster, it burns my bread, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. It just has a mind of its own, and it just keeps burning my toast. And I'm disgusted. So I'm going to overthrow this toaster and get another one. By golly, replace it with something else. And so I just yank the chain on that toaster and disable it and throw it out the door into the garbage, not out to make litter, but into the proper garbage receptacle. And I got to have a toaster now, so I get another one. So I create, let's say I'm very handy, and I just build my own toaster. I wouldn't want to build a toaster, or I wouldn't want to go down to the dollar store and buy a toaster down there for whatever they cost nowadays. I'll just buy a new toaster, let's say, and I buy it, I bring it home, and guess what? It burns my toast as well. That's a catchphrase. What do I think? What's my mood when it comes to the United States government or the federal government nowadays? Right now, my mood is they keep burning my toast. These fascist, Nazi, police state bastards keep burning my toast. Imagine that one. I think that's clever. I'm clever. Yes, I am. Nothing wrong with being clever. Bear in mind, the bad guys can be clever too. So here I bought a toaster to replace the old toaster, which I overthrew violently. I picked it up, I yanked it off the wall, and threw it out in the yard. God damn it. And then I go buy a new toaster, and there it is. And I set it down, and I plug it in, and put some toast bread in it, and push the button, and it, boom, burns my toast. And unfortunately, the knob to adjust the degree of toasting going on in the toaster is broken. And I can't turn the heat down on the toaster so it won't burn my toast. It's permanently set at burning my toast. In this case, the federal government in America is determined to burn our toast, so to speak. Or more accurately, I suppose, burn us. So that's the new catchphrase for me. Make that go viral. The federal government is burning our toast. And we're fed up with it. And we're not going to put up with it anymore. And we're going to toss that government out and create a new one. And I don't mean, well, you could say by electing better people, if that's even possible. The pool of good, honest, decent human beings who believe in freedom in America is very small, apparently, from what I've seen. And be kind of hard to get a government established today with good, honest, decent, law-abiding Americans who are willing to obey the law of the Constitution. If you're a government official, that's your law. You have to obey that law, which applies to you as a government official, like presidents and so forth. And we have to understand this, be clear on this. The Constitution is for the government, not for the people. For and of mean what they mean. So, didn't get very many odds and ends and bits and pieces in there this show. Talked almost the whole show about this one subject. So, to sum up, what we need is, if we are to compare, 20% of the people of America need to be in favor of changing the government and getting rid of the old and bringing in a better form of government. Or keep the same principles, keep the same Constitution, pretty much, and just say, okay, you're old, you're corrupt, you're evil, you're genocidal, you're murderous, you bastards, you're criminals, criminally insane, and we're moving you out of the White House, for example, and out of Congress and so on, and we're going to put some new people in there. Eventually, because we're not in a big hurry, because without government doing terrible things every day and not being able to, being disabled, they can't cause too much harm. So let's just leave it that way while we're figuring out what we're going to do about a new form of government, or a new government formed under the same principles as the one we have now, except the government officials actually will be forced to obey the Constitution. And if they don't, then they're corrupt like the old government, and we'll put them out too. By whatever means necessary, I might add. By whatever means necessary, because freedom is freedom, and it's worth it. If you're going to settle on, I live in a free country, but I'm actually a slave, and I got chains on my ankles, then I'm sorry. That's not good. So anyway, the good doctor said that's the people's responsibility of the country that they live in. So the Chinese have to deal with their freedom and their government and their rights. Doesn't mean you can't get help, because the French helped the American revolutionists win that struggle. And so whether you like it or not, or agree with it or not, the American people do owe a considerable amount of gratitude to the French. At least at the time, in the late 1700s. They were very instrumental in saving our ass and helping us win independence from Britain. So in that sense, yeah, it's okay. But in the modern day society, we have aggression from other countries against other countries, and aggression of the United States government against practically every country on the planet. So who would help us, the citizens of America? Can we call in the French to help us replace and abolish and replace the federal government that we have today? It might be a little difficult to deal with, but we would hope for some support from France and other countries. All right. So I think I've been clear on this, and I didn't get a lot of odds and ends and pieces and bits and stuff in this show, but this was important. So what I've said is what I've said, and it's now recorded and ready to be posted on the radio station. On my podcast, as it were. All right. So leave you here at this. Think about this a little bit. Maybe. It's a good idea, I think. And if you're busy doing other things, trying to survive, then I don't blame you. But if you're listening to this and you had the time to listen to it, then you have the time to think about it as a residual of having listened to the show. All right? That's all I'm asking. Give it some consideration. And you can form an opinion, or, as I like to say, form an intelligent, logical conclusion. All right, talk to you later. We're going to go, and we'll come back and have something else for you. Bye-bye.